Okay, I think we're ready to get going. So welcoming you all. We're delighted to be here again. This is the second of our courageous conversations about race. And today we're going to be talking about staff, governor and trustee recruitment with our esteemed guests. We're hoping that this will take the form of a conversation and that we'll be able to weave in your questions and your comments and your inputs. So we're really delighted that everyone is here. We are the Black Asian Minority Ethnic Educators Network, and we have a couple of colleagues who are in amongst you in the participants, and we hopefully should have one other colleague joining us to take part in the conversation. We're delighted to have with us today Angie Browne, who is an educational leadership coach, the author of Lighting the Way, The Case for Ethical Leadership, and a former head teacher. We have Karen Giles, who is head teacher at a primary school in Brent and chair of trustees of a multi-academy trust in South London and Kent. And we have Malcolm John, who is the founder of Action for Trustee Racial Diversity and a trustee of the Association of Chairs and chair of the Young Harrow Foundation. So a wealth of knowledge and experience that they're going to be able to share tonight. We would ask you to use the chat, and if you can see the Q&A function as well, if you have any specific questions to the panel while they're speaking, that will be great to put them in there, but we'll pick them up wherever they go. We're going to kick off with asking each of our guests to speak from their perspective on this topic, and then we will go into conversation mode. So we're going to start with Angie. If you'd like to take the stage. Thank you.
Penny. Hi everyone, it's lovely to see all of these faces and people in the chat. It's really lovely to be here on this topic and to be given the opportunity to talk on it. And when I was asked to talk about the kind of topic of recruiting for diversity, both staff, governance and trustees, from my perspective, I did think about it from the perspective as a head teacher, but actually I realized that most of the time I think about things from the perspective of having grown up in rural Devon. So I was a black child who grew up in rural Devon and then became a teacher in the southwest of England, spent many years working in schools in Wiltshire, in Bristol and in South Gloucestershire. So my perspective is very much kind of rooted in going to endless interviews for endless promotions, because I was wildly ambitious and really loved my job in schools in Wiltshire, Bristol and South Gloucestershire. So I think my perspective is quite an unusual one. It's a very specific one, but you know, lest we forget, there are lots and lots of people of colour working outside the major cities in the UK, and their experiences are my experience, and they're really valid, because there is something to be said for a career that is shaped largely because you think you may or may not get a job in the school that you're applying for. So my career was very much kind of bent around thinking, oh, that school's in the inner city, so they're more likely to think that I am relevant for their context than that job that's in a leafy, semi-rural market town. I was always the only black person that ever walked into a room when I applied for when I'd got past the kind of application stage and was meeting the head teacher, as it was when I was applying for senior leadership team roles, or the board at the chair, the governors when I was applying for headship roles. I felt as though I was the only black person that can have ever applied for a job in the whole of the Southwest, because I was the only ever black person there. I was the only one with Afro hair, and it used to be a source of great anxiety for me as I thought about all of the people who I perceived to have straight, manageable hair as I got myself ready for the interview, thinking I'm going to have to spend double the amount of money on a Hobbs suit to make myself appear smooth and crisp and pristine. I was the only one that I felt went into interviews with a sense that I was already going to be discounted as non-viable because I was such an oddity. It was so strange to have this person rock up that even before the proceedings had really begun, it felt like it was a hard no on many occasions. When I started applying for senior leadership posts, so deputy headship and for headship posts, I would say I applied for about 6 or 7 deputy headships over at different points in my career, and then probably a similar number of headships. It meant that I was moving from being interviewed by head teachers who felt like they were quite possibly easier to influence. It felt like there was a way in which I could communicate with them that might make me seem viable, into the realm of being interviewed by governing bodies and by trustees. And this marked a really significant shift for me, because again, it felt as though now I was not only the only Black person who was being interviewed, but I was sometimes then facing this kind of sea, this row of white faces, many of whom I imagined didn't picture me as their head teacher. And of course, it's not because they were white boards that I thought that they may not have seen me as a head teacher, but I went into those interviews thinking, are they really going to picture me running this school in rural Wiltshire? Do they really feel that they have enough of an affinity with me and with my background, or what they perceive to be my background, to hand me the keys to their school? And so on many occasions, it felt like the most intimidating moment was the bit when I would have to meet the chair of governors, or when I would have to sit with a group of governors in a room and kind of explain myself. It felt so anxiety provoking that would be the bit that I felt I didn't know confidently that I could surmount. So writing the application, yes, I could do that. Getting the interview, I could absolutely do that. If there was a blind interview process, I knew I could get myself into the room. But that moment of facing often I think on nearly all of the occasions, a white male chair of governors was really, really intimidating for me. And I consider myself to be somebody who has masses of confidence and a real sense of my ability to do the job well. So I guess my perspective on diversifying governors, on diversifying boards, comes from that very personal feeling of not wanting others to experience the additional anxiety of being a person of colour, because going for interviews for headship, for deputy headship, are intimidating enough in their own right, without that additional sense of not being made to feel as though I was the expected one. And so I think I'm really interested now in how the system flexes and understands how it can encourage people from diverse backgrounds to want to apply for jobs, and how it can encourage people from diverse backgrounds to want to sit on those boards. I have spent a lot of time since headship, post headship, working with women and working with people of colour, men and women, who have wanted to apply for senior leadership roles. And so I now coach senior leaders and head teachers. And I've spent a lot of time kind of doing the soul searching work of unpacking whether or not coaching people into those roles, or coaching people to apply for those roles, is actually kind of ethical, because I felt feelings bordering on distress as I've moved through the ranks towards my final role, which was as Deputy CEO of a trust. And so sometimes I've had to question whether, in all honesty, it is the best thing to try to coach somebody into. And I come down on the side of yes, if the people I work with really want to become head teachers, really want to serve in a community, and they want the opportunity to do that job, then it's absolutely my job to support them in doing that. But it's also my job to be very real with them about the experience, because it felt to me as I was moving through and progressing towards headship that was always the bit that was missed out. There was never a conversation about the fact that I was going to be placed in situations in which I would feel discomfort. It was the elephant in the room, and I'm not quite sure why nobody was prepared to have that courageous conversation with me as I made my way through, to name it. So that what I wasn't left with was a sense of something is really uncomfortable, but I'm not quite sure what it is. So I coach people now who are confident that they are able to do the job, but are fearful that their face will not fit. And for that reason, I'm passionate about schools being very conscious about diversifying their staff and being very open and welcoming to having a diverse staff. And I also coach people who have had years of experience and have been applying for jobs relentlessly, and yet have still had feedback that their face doesn't actually fit in terms of the role that they're applying for. And I coach them and try to unpack the elephant in the room and actually name it and say, well, what do you think, what might have been at play? We're looking at institutional racism. Perhaps we have to name these things, because otherwise what we do is we leave people with the sense that something about them wasn't right, when we know that the thing about them that wasn't right was the system and not them at all. And for many of my coachees, that move into having those sorts of courageous conversations is the move that enables them to then move forward, because there's something very empowering about understanding the structure that's at play, about understanding what you might face, and about being given the language and the skills and the support to then present yourself in those situations, in those interviews. So that's the kind of, I guess, my interest from a coaching perspective. And I hope this evening that we can touch on some of the things that I really feel are absent in the process. I hope that we can touch on the absence of encouraging language that really inspires and excites people from diverse backgrounds to want to apply for that job, to think, wow, that person is speaking to me. That sounds like the kind of school I want to work in. I hope that we can think about the complete absence of Black and brown faces when we are advertising our schools. And I don't mean the children, I don't mean the picture of a white head teacher surrounded by Black and brown children. I mean the picture of the Black and brown members of staff, of the Black and brown leaders surrounded by Black and brown and white children. I hope that we can talk this evening about the fact that this is not just a service that we do for Black and brown children in putting in place a diverse team, that we say, well, you can't be what you can't see, and so here are a couple of Black and brown teachers for you. That this is actually about having cutting edge organizations in which we have a recognition and excitement about diversifying our thought, about uncovering our blind spots, and about seeing what we could do better. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Angie. That's really useful to kick us off. And of course, your questions, your comments, your thoughts, all of them in the Q&A, in the chat, and we will have time to discuss further. I'm going to hand over now to Karen, who will pick up the conversation and speak from her perspective. So thank you, Karen.
So good evening, everyone, and I'm really pleased to be here. Very esteemed panel that we have, and very inspired, Angie. First, I was just going to go straight into it, and I thought, you know what, my story is so different to yours. There's such a contrast, because it's always good to start with a story. I grew up in an area which was predominantly Black, Caribbean, Asian, etc. And so I was definitely part of the global majority, as I would call myself. And I had the experience of positive discrimination when I was deciding to be a teacher. In fact, I wanted to be a fashion buyer, walking home one day to the station, picked up the Evening Standard, and there was a job right in the middle of it, just saying, do you want to be a teacher in Brent? And I grew up in Brent. And I looked at it and thought, that's what I've always wanted to do. I'd never even, it was just never in my consciousness until I saw this. And this was a positive discrimination, straight 1984, positive discrimination. It's, you know, they were actively inviting members of the Black community to apply. And it meant that, I think there was an assumption that you didn't have positive action, thank you very much. There was an assumption that we wouldn't necessarily have all of the qualifications. And so I applied. I didn't need to do the access course. There were 4 of these kind of almost scholarships that were available. They pay you as an unqualified teacher throughout your training, and then they expected you to work for a minimum of 2 years. And I've been there now for 32 years. So it was, I felt when I walked into the room that they wanted me to be the answer to the solution, or the answer to, you know, the problem, let's put it that way. And I know that that's sometimes still the case. So it's not always that I've experienced the feeling of other. More times, more often than not, I have felt as if I am. They've looked forward to meeting me because they think that, you know, on paper I might have looked okay, and actually I'm meeting this quota. But that's another story. So I've been head at Barham for, this is my 18th year, and Barham is a very strange school if you think about the demographic. 100% of our children come from somewhere else. Again, I call them the global majority. I would say that race isn't always as simple as black and white and brown. Actually, there are dynamics between different races. And my school is predominantly, or 50% of my children are Gujarati Indian. The next largest group would be Tamil Sri Lankan, and so on and so forth. If there are any white children, they are Eastern European. So we don't actually have any of the indigenous population, if I put it that way. And it's very strange initially to be leading a community that looks like that as a Black woman, because of the tensions that we've sometimes experienced between different races. But it's worked. What I've always been keen to do is a point difference. So in my role as head teacher, I didn't even articulate it. I just knew that my children had quite a confined radius which they operated in. Most of my children didn't necessarily know or see other people. They hadn't, you know, even though they're in Wembley Central, they hadn't visited the central London, or, you know, been to places that perhaps you would take for granted. So I felt that it was my duty to appoint difference. And I'm sure that many of you will remember a few years ago, we experienced a teacher shortage. And there's nothing like a shortage that that's the mother of invention right there. And we were really concerned about all the different ways in which we had to be extremely creative about the ways in which we could not only attract, but also retain. Because again, the point of retention is, and we'll probably speak about this later, you know, it's a stitch in time saves 9. It's just the economic thing to do. If you retain, then you don't need to recruit. So we were finding all sorts of ways in which we would be able to, so we had like a rolling recruitment. There wasn't a job that we just said, okay, it's open, and then this is the closing date. It was just a perennial thing. And we saw almost all of the candidates, because you and I both know, all of us know, that what you look like on paper and what you're looking like in real life and how you perform is completely different to anything that you could consider when you're having a look at a very angular application form. If we think about the missed opportunities that are around that as well, And the missed opportunities, I would say, sometimes around equal opportunities. When we're trying to achieve equal opportunities, we're afraid of asking interview questions that are perhaps we didn't ask the last person, we're not going to ask the next person. When you get into a situation where you've asked your interview questions and you then delve deeper, that's when you're asking those questions and you really get to know if the values are aligned. That's really important. It's never mind about, you know, black, white, or indifferent. It's actually about the alignment of values as well. We tried to use social media. We did some headhunting. And that deep questioning also just really important in being able to gauge where that person wanted to go, their trajectory, and being able to support them, being able to offer the support for that. I think when we're recruiting, and that's just about my experience as a head teacher, we have to be thinking about that pipeline, not from learning, because what we did, we actually had, and we still have, learning assistants who we employ, but they're graduates. We employ them as graduate interns. That means that they know that they will be able to use the year or two that they're with us to bolster their application for teacher training, and then move on to come back to us and then just continue that career, which is from learning assistant. Sometimes it's from pupil to learning assistant to trainee teacher to NQT to being experienced teacher, and we've already seen there's probably about 2 or 3 of our year group leaders are actually homegrown from the seed, little embryo of our little baby teachers that we've grown all the way along. So I'm also chair of the Inspire Partnership Board of Trustees, and that has been a real revelation. I'm hoping that I will have an opportunity to speak about the ways in which we have, and in fact, you know, Penny's sitting there all innocent, but actually Penny's part of this as well. I think the most courageous thing that we did in terms of race was to appoint a nominations committee. And that nominations committee means that we can have very open conversations about what we really need. It doesn't have to be PC, it doesn't have to be justified, it just needs to say, this is the community that we serve. This is what this board needs to look like. It would be a missed opportunity if we didn't try and make sure that we got the best possible people. And not just in terms of race, because I know that when I turn up every day, wherever, I'm not turning up just as a black person, I turn up as a black woman. And so we have to recognize the intersectionality, but we also have to recognize all the skills that people bring. And so we were really keen on trying to be very specific about getting that full repertoire of skills and characteristics, and to maybe be as specific as saying, for our board, our members, we need a Black West African female who has had experience of being on a board already and lives in this particular location, and not being afraid to be that specific, but also leaving ourselves open to get some wonderful people. Have I got more time, Penny? Lovely, lovely. Okay, so I just wanted to, I always try to start with my why, and my why would be, I suppose the first one is about the greater the representation, the higher the outperformance, with outperformance being even higher for diversity in ethnicity than for gender. And that comes from McKinsey, May 2020. So, you know, that's current. It's not just that we want to have the united colours of Benetton, actually this is why. Diversity of thoughts, which Angie alluded to, absolutely. Bringing your whole self, being open and feeling a sense of belonging, whichever board you're serving. And less of the critical friends, you know, we also talk about being critical friends, and actually being more the challenging champions. So being the champion for your community, but also challenging and holding ourselves and others to account. That recognition of intersectionality, as I said, we're not just one-dimensional. And the opportunity for role modeling, what great opportunities are we offering people? We don't want people who are fully formed. We want people who we can give the opportunity to become as fully formed as they need to be. Opportunity for role modeling, and that's throughout the pipeline, giving local communities a confidence in their schools. So I'll finish on that.
Thank you. That's perfect timing, and that was great input that really helps us to understand some of the considerations that you've been thinking about in both of your roles as head teacher, but also as a chair of trustees. And that segues really nicely into Malcolm. Take it away, Malcolm.
Thanks, Penny. And can I thank BayMed for inviting me to talk at this illustrious gathering of so many people. And it's the most dynamic chat I've seen ever all year, I have to say. And I think that proves you're all educators and have a good chat on you. So that is brilliant. And I think an hour just won't be enough to cover all we're going to cover today. And already Angela and Karen have raised so many issues. So it's going to be tough. So I expect this will be a series of chats rather than just a one-off, I hope. And I guess mine is about practical solutions to things that I've encountered. And I've been on trustee boards for 18, 19 years. I've sat on 7, 8 charities. And generally, I've been the only Black or Asian trustee on those charities. They varied from pretty large to small. And I've got those positions, again, through my own network, through my own contacts. And sadly, not because of any formal recruitment process. And I guess that's why I started my campaign, which is Action for Trustee Racial Diversity, about 18 months ago, to try and address the issues of underrepresentation in the charity sector on trustee boards. I'm also a founder of the trustee of the Association of Chairs, as Penny said, which is an umbrella body to support chairs in the charity sector, which was set up about 5 years ago. And that was advertised, probably the only one I've actually applied to formally. I was advertised last year, and I wasn't sure. I looked at the website, and it was largely white, middle-class men and women. I think there was one Asian woman on the board. And I thought, do I really want to join this board? Will it meet my needs? Then I thought, well, actually, I can make a difference, and I can bring my campaign work to the board. So to bring that racial diversity element so that to make them more aware of what needs to be done. So hopefully it was a win-win, and I'm still on the board and the campaign is being promoted. So I think that's been really good. I'll talk for about 6 or 7 minutes about the campaign and what the barriers and solutions and challenges are to increasing racial diversity on trustee boards. And I might offer a few solutions, but there are a lot more, and hopefully in the discussion, we can enlarge and pick up on those. So first, I think 4 key stats on charity trustee boards. 7 out of every 10 trustees are recruited through informal networks and contacts. So that's over 70%. 92% of trustees are white, older, above average income and education. Overall, in England and Wales, there are only 8% of trustees from Black and Asian backgrounds, and only 2.9% of women of colour, which in numerical terms is fewer than 5,000 women out of 168,000 trustees. So it's absurd and ridiculous. Put that in context, 14% of the population in England and Wales is from Black and Asian backgrounds. In London, it's 36.8%. So I think that proves we've got a really long way to go. The barriers are wide, and I know that both Karen and Angela have alluded to them. There's the overcoming the not for me and the why not like me perception, which is hugely strong. It's seeing what's called the pale, male and stale predominance of the current trustee boards and the great and the good. And it's not seeing people with skills, but who don't come in those traditional categories of trusteeships. The barriers, again, for aspiring trustees is, I think, there's a lack of awareness or knowledge of charities and trusteeships. I've been to events with people from the corporate world who actually probably don't know what charities are about or even what a trustee is. So there is a need for charities themselves to go out and promote and raise awareness of who they are and the benefits they bring to society and to individuals. So again, another challenge. Again, I think, harping on Karen and Angela, people don't think they've got the skills the boards are looking for. Boards themselves look at traditional skills. They don't look beyond that. They look lived experience is something that they don't see a lot or look for a lot or even know how to get it. So again, there's some huge gaps in terms of that. Again, poor experience of applying previously. We all know somebody who's had a go at applying, has been turned down, they don't fit, as Angela has already said. They're told they don't fit, not really told why. And if that happens to you once, it happens to your friends once, why on earth would you want to put yourself through that again? So again, a strong need to overcome that. The language, again, already mentioned. You look at adverts for trusteeships and they talk about things like prior trusteeship. Well, that rules out a lot of Black and Asian people with good skills. They talk about senior managing experience. Again, if you're a young Black and Asian aspiring trustee, you haven't got that. You might be running your own business. You say you've got business commercial experience, but not that senior managing experience that boards are asking for. So language is really important. And there is now a shift towards that. And part of the work that my campaign is doing is about changing that language. On the demand side, the recruiter themselves. Again, the majority of trustees from the same backgrounds, same experiences, and often they only want to maintain the status quo. Not surprising, but they need to look beyond that. Often again, they don't understand diversity or inclusion and no awareness of what that actually means for their boards or for their organizations. So if you look at solutions, talk among themselves, have a discussion about what it actually means. Probably bringing in somebody from outside to actually try and talk through and work out a plan for addressing that. Often the thinking about how to address diversity is quite underdeveloped. It's largely about diversity per se and not about the skills that diverse people can bring to the organization. As I said before, they rely on existing networks, some familiar networks, and largely the boards don't know that Black and Asian networks actually do exist. Part of the work of my campaign the last year or so has been to draw up a database of now over 400 Black and Asian network organizations in the UK. 400. It's the first time that's happened. And it's taken all this time to get to that stage. So the networks are out there, the skills are out there, the people are out there, but it takes time, effort, and commitment for charities to go out and actually find that out for themselves. Hopefully my work will make it easier for them. And it's not a quick fix, it's not an overnight. So therefore it's about giving priority to it within an organization as important to their objectives and what they want to do. Leadership, crucial. Unless you're supported by the chair of governors, the chair of the board, the CEO, it ain't going to happen. That support is crucial to setting the culture and the vision within the organization. When I was with Anti-Slavery International, I was on the board there. And that's when I started the campaign. I was vice chair of that board. And when I left, I was the only Black and Asian person who was on the board. There were no others when I left. And that's when I decided to help them to recruit up to 3 Black and Asian trustees. And there was some internal discussion. We had a new CEO, wasn't convinced that it was the thing to do. Thought was it legitimate? All those sort of questions. Eventually, we agreed that we have to do it. And we're very, very explicit about recruiting 3 Black and Asian trustees, not just 1, not just 2, but 3. one in itself isn't going to change the culture of the organisation, often seen as a token, and won't have the clout or the position to actually affect real change within that organisation. Okay, some solutions, just some. There are loads more. Again, I've already mentioned, have a good discussion about have an organisation where you are now, where you want to be, and then actually form a plan in terms of how you get there. And again, bring in external diversity, somebody who can talk it through, who knows the business, who can talk to you about what it means and the benefits that you get from doing that. In terms of convincing people who don't want to apply, I think Karen mentioned it, you've got to be serious about where they want to change. You're not playing at it. You've got to convince potential applicants that you really want them. You produce a case study of the sort of person you want. And so they can see somebody who's actually like them, who brings their skills, and make a video, do it on YouTube, use Vimeo, but demonstrate that's the sort of person that you want. So people can see themselves and not see somebody who doesn't look at all like them. Really key. Skills, so it's just about skills. It's about organizational benefit. So be really clear on the skills, the expertise, the diversity that you want to make your organization much more effective and inclusive. Skills audits, diverse skills audits is a good way of doing that. So again, see if you can bring someone in to help you in terms of doing that. Adverts, be explicit. So don't just say you're seeking a diverse range of trustees. Say where you think your gaps are, say where you think your service users are, and say how best you think you're going to reflect that. So be very specific. Don't make it too general, because then you get the same old general type of people who've been there before and got the t-shirt. In terms of, you've got to reach out to and engage Black and Asian network organisations. They are out there, but actually they don't know about you, you don't know about them. Don't just start a week before the deadline of the ad. That's not going to work either. Plan well in advance, 6 months, start the dialogue then. And then they'll feel as if they've got a place on your board or on your senior management team. And inclusion and retention. Again, no point recruiting someone if they leave after 6 months, 9 months, a year. So again, already mentioned, ensure that your own environment is inclusive and welcoming. Again, to repeat what's been said before. A few thoughts on that. Diversity statements. So set out clearly in black and white how you're going to address diversity within your organisation and how you're going to embed it within your ways of working at all levels. And then monitor those, set targets, monitor those targets, report back to your board in terms of progress. Appoint a champion, again, senior person, diversity and inclusion champion. Not necessarily the only black person on the board. It's probably better if it's somebody else, if it's the chair of the board, the vice chair, and somebody who can actually, who has a clout and can affect change. Said already, don't just recruit one Black and Asian trustee. Think about ring fencing vacant positions, so you can you can attract a diverse range of candidates. So don't take the first people who apply, who may be the same people you've already got on the board. It's not about quotas, it's about saying you've got a diversity gap and this is how you're going to meet it. So it's about your targets. Finally, last 2 points on inclusion. Make sure everyone is heard equally. So at the board meeting, ask about views, ask each board meeting, ask everyone how they thought it went, what went well, what didn't go so well, and how it might be improved. Finally, engage in continuous training throughout the organisation at all levels on the value of diversity. Training is resource intensive, it's not always easy to maintain or to commit to in terms of other organisation priorities, but it's essential. So I'll stop there and look forward to the discussion that's to come. Thank you.
Thanks so much to all three of you. Thank you, Malcolm, for that bit where you've also sort of given us some tips on things that we can practically do. I think what's coming out in all three of your talks and some of the questions is probably a theme around being really clear on why you're doing this. And I think that's often where where governing boards, where staff teams, where people doing recruitment aren't 100% sure of why. They just think, oh, it's good to be diverse. And I think that also links quite well to the point that was made about making sure that you are not putting somebody in the position of being the first and the only person who doesn't look like everybody else, or doesn't sound like everybody else, and doesn't maybe have a lived experience that matches everyone else's. I was wondering if any of you wanted to kind of talk to that point, or if there was something that you each wanted to pick up with each other that resonated with you. And I guess just jump in and unmute and talk to those prompts, or something else if they're not the things you wanted to talk about.
I'm going to dive in. I think, as I said, as I've already said, I'm less concerned about having people that look like the community that we serve, because I think this is where people end up being responsible then for the community that they serve. I've been recruited because we want to have a teacher in front of our children that looks like the children. It's a lovely sentence. It's a sentence that wants to sound nice, but actually what that means in practice is, in the classroom, in the school, is that you by proxy become responsible for the issues, for the families, for being some kind of strange conduit by virtue of being of colour. And I think if you are a board, if you're here in the audience as somebody that is a trustee, is a governor, you also have a duty of care for the member of staff that you put in that position. And it's inappropriate. It's inappropriate, it is burdensome, and it isn't something that is in line with really ensuring that every member of staff is there to flourish and thrive and become the best teacher and leader that they can be. So I think we can be a bit more ambitious about why we want diversity in our organisations and institutions. And for me, it's really important that if I live in a country that is, although, you know, increasingly higher numbers of people from minority ethnic groups in the country, but if I live in a country that is predominantly white, and I see around me the judiciary, the police service, the health service, the education service, I see around me lots and lots of white faces in positions of power. I want those people who are being educated right now to have looked at their teachers and to have thought, it's perfectly normal for my teacher to be a brown face. It's perfectly normal for my head teacher to be a brown person. I want the future judge, politician, healthcare administrator to consider that to be the absolute norm. And I think this isn't about who we need in front of black or brown children. This is who we need in front of all children, because they are all moving forward into some role in society in which we need to kind of overcome this this strange situation that we have, where still only less than 5% of head teachers are black or brown. So yeah, that's my starter for 10.
Yeah, I think, Angie, I'll just come back on that. I think the role model thing is really imperative. And again, I think if people don't see people like themselves within organizations, they're not necessarily going to want to engage with that organization. So I think from the external perception, I think that's crucial. And I think you're right. Organizations have to make sure that they're not saying that if you're black, you're representing all black people and so on. I think it's about saying that actually they're looking for a more diverse range of people that they've already got to bring, again, more creative thinking, different experiences. Yeah. And I think the lived experience thing is, again, really important. Of most boards, I suspect, don't have that lived experience. So people who actually understand the issues that they're dealing with. So largely they're people who don't understand. They're above average income, education, as already said, they're middle class, they don't understand these issues. And with the best intention in the world, they're never genuinely going to represent those issues in terms of their services.
Can I jump in here also and say we just got to go back to what we're here for? We're about school improvement. My role as a head teacher is about school improvement. My role as a trust leader is about school improvement. And so if we want the same things for our children, either the biological children or the children who we have in our schools for whom we're in loco parentis, aren't we supposed to be trying to ensure that they, that the whole social mobility aspect of it, they're supposed to turn out better than this generation, and so on and so on. And so if we have that diversity of thought, if we have those high expectations, if we have that challenge around the board table or in schools, either at the front of the classroom or leading the school, then that's the way that we're going to achieve it. Again, not going back to the whole United Colours of Benetton. Yes, it's pretty to have all the different colours around the table and how worthy are we, but it's actually about school improvement.
Yeah.
Great.
I'd like to pick up something that Angela said about the system and about how you coach people and whether you should coach people. I thought it was a really interesting issue you raised there about whether you should coach people and whether you're coaching people to fit into a system or whether actually a system should fit into them. I'd quite welcome, again, a few more thoughts, I think, from you, Angela, in terms of that.
There was also a question
that I'm still grappling with. Sorry, Penny.
Sorry, I was just going to say, if you can feed into that, there was also a question about reverse mentoring, which I think is useful to try and work into that question about mentoring. Sorry for interrupting.
Yeah, no, not at all. I think what came up for me when I really thought about coaching people into the system came after I'd had a number of coaching conversations with people who had been who'd been knocked back on several occasions, and every time I spoke to them, I actually couldn't see or hear any good reason for the way in which they've been knocked back and the kind of speed at which they've been knocked back and the frequency that some people have been knocked back. And it kind of came to me like a bit of a bolt out of the blue that it felt like I was participating in gaslighting them if I was to continue to say, oh yes, it does, you just have to, the thing is that there are lots of applicants for every role, and talking in that way as though there was just something that as coaching is about, essentially it's a kind of colonial approach to dealing with deficit as we see it. It's an idea that we have that somebody needs something fixing, and if we just give them these skills, then we can move them on to the place that we see is the right place for them to be. And actually what I was seeing was that there was not just no deficit, there was talent in spades. There was absolute brilliance and a commitment to wanting to change the system like nothing else. The commitment that says, I'm going to put in 20 applications to become an assistant head when you've been teaching for 20 years nearly, and you should already be ahead. I mean, it was just beyond me, and I felt like I can't perpetuate this. I have to name this. This isn't safe. It's not safe for me to continue to coach you into those situations unless we've named it, and unless I can support you in going into those situations feeling as though you're equipped with all of the information, and that it's okay to think to yourself, what's at play here is structural. It isn't about me. That's okay to have those thoughts, and in fact that might be helpful. So to the point of reverse mentoring, does the questioner mean mentoring people in the system as opposed to mentoring people, as in not mentoring people of colour or coaching people of colour, but coaching people who are receiving the applications?
I don't know, because it hasn't been said, but there is a sort of there is a trend towards having people of colour coaching white people to help them kind of understand some of the issues and to sort of lead them through in real time what the experience might be. So I think it's referring to that, and there's quite mixed views about whether that is repeat trauma or whether it is useful.
Well, I think as a coach, I'm very conscious of how much I transfer onto other people, and so as a coach I would engage with somebody professionally, of course, in that, but I wouldn't say that that's the role of a black or brown person in an institution to take on that burden. I actually don't think it's incredibly complicated. I think if you think with compassion and you imagine an institution in which somebody of colour needs to come into the institution, the organisation, and to continually be met with some of the barriers that are put in their place, that it's actually a matter of expanding your compassion, thinking through your processes with deep empathy as a leader. I don't think it's a difficult concept.
Great, that's really useful. And somebody's just clarified it that it can also include informed white people coaching white people. And certainly, you know, some of the work that we're doing on the Anti-Racist Schools Award is exactly that. It's white colleagues having conversation with white colleagues, helping them to unpick some of those areas. I think we also had quite a few people asking questions around, like, how do you get these actual conversations even happening around the table? And I think what we're trying to do through this courageous conversation is slightly to model, you know, that you can talk about these elephants and not get trodden on by one of them.
Yeah. I think this year, with George Floyd, Black Lives Matter, and COVID, conversations are happening much more than we've seen before. There's no doubt about that. And I'm being approached every week by chairs and CEOs of charities asking for my support for my campaign. So it's happening. Arguably, it's happening from those people who probably have got some sense of diversity and inclusion. And there's loads of other people who probably haven't had that conversation yet. My focus is on people who want to be helped but don't know how to do it. So I think that's quite a lot of people who are out there. How you change those people who haven't started yet, I think it is much, much more difficult. And I was asked a question at another event I did a week or so ago about the one thing I'd change. And it'll be the chair or CEO if they're a block and a barrier to change within the organisation. There are a lot of people who are there, have been there for a long time, had leaders who actually I expect will not change. How you change that is quite tricky if you're on a board. Again, the answer I gave was actually everyone on a board has got a responsibility to affect and to try and change things. So if you're a trustee on that board, it's up to you to stand up and say, I believe that things have to change. I think we've all got to stand up and say it. Don't just leave it to one person or two people. So I think I have the courage to say, I don't think that we're doing things in the right way.
Great, thank you. Karen, did you want to come in on any of that, or did you have a different?
Yeah, I was just thinking that it's, again, the elephant in the room is that sometimes people feel that they don't want to bring it up, they can't bring it up, they haven't got the vocabulary for it, they feel they're going to be jumped on, they feel that there's going to be something aggressive going on. It doesn't have to be a conversation like that. I think if you provide an adequate forum, I think it needs to be at the right time. So that's why I always talk about the whole nominations committee, because that's an excellent forum. If you've done some reading, there's some, you know, again, with this whole evening, there is some reading that has been provided to you. I really enjoyed Karen Giles' process in terms of the Difference Leadership Programme. Some great reading to be able to maybe have a discussion about. It gets right to the point. I think that we should really be providing the forum to have a conversation which is not aggressive, which is not pointing the fingers, which is not making people feel uncomfortable, but making people feel as if they want to be part of the conversation. It involves allyship, it involves everything that needs to be said, but it's done in a way which is taking it as an opportunity to be able to make a change. I think for me, when I first, we first had the George Floyd and the Black Lives Matters and the conversations that were coming up, I was thinking, am I really going to have to talk about this again? I've been talking about this for 30 years. I did my dissertation on Black boys, and that was 100 years ago, back in the 1800s. Come on, am I going to have to speak about it again? But actually, this is not a time for speaking. This is a time for action. And that's why I'm happy to have this conversation, because this conversation is about taking action.
Great. I wanted also to ask you guys to speak to, there's quite a few questions around sort of the recruiting somebody who isn't fully formed. We say we always want the best person for the job. How do you match up the best person for the job as far as your biased brain is telling you? The person who isn't fully formed, positive action, you know, those sorts of dilemmas. There's actually a direct question here about if you're recruiting a candidate and the white candidate performed better in a lesson observation and interview, but you really, really like the black candidate and want them to be on your team, like what do you do? So I think there's a lot of general confusion around you know, how we look for people's skills and what they're bringing with them.
Karen, go on, you jump in.
So, again, referring to Karen Giles' video, she's gone through that process. And what was really interesting is that she started with the blind screening and just thought she was being really hip, you know, no names, no looking at the uni and whether, you know, gender, ethnicity on the application at all. And, you know, doing the lesson observations in the interview. But what she found is that in the end, she had a room full of white females at the end of it. And in fact, going back to have a look at that and really digging deep at that process, she found that there were too few men who applied. BAME candidates dropped out, but also the BAME candidates outperformed their written scores in person. So having a real look at ourselves in terms of don't expect that linear progression, that measurement against our own trajectory. Don't be blind, but the favorite thing she said for me was guarding against bias. Every single one of us, I have bias, you have bias, we all have bias. We somehow want to, yes, we want to appoint difference, but we also want to appoint people who are just like us at the same time. And, you know, she really felt there were three things that she, you know, in fact, no, there's four. See it, say it, sort it. When you see how you've recruited, and you need to actually verbalize that, sort it out, and lean into the mistakes that you've made. Change that, headhunt, name the problem. So the problem is structural racism. So we've called it that. So now we've got some solutions around it. And then sharing the problem. So it's not just the sole responsibility of the one or two Black people in the room. It's actually the responsibility of the whole board. And don't set quotas and lower lower the bar. So when it's going back to what you said originally. So you have somebody who doesn't, you know, that they're kind of a work in progress. You're not lowering the bar. They just perhaps haven't had the experience that you've wanted them to have. And so again, it's that thing of giving people the tools to be able to succeed. We are educators, you know, or we're serving schools. That's what schools do. You know, we like to develop people, we like to teach people, we like to, you know, that's why we're into it. Apart from the stationery fetish, we actually like the teaching. And so I just think, again, don't set quotas and don't lower the bar.
I love that. I love what you say there, Karen. And I think there is something about taking responsibility when we are in post and as leaders for ensuring that people don't go through the process thinking everything's okay when we know that it might not be. When we know where gaps might be, when we know where with a bit of development somebody will really flourish at interview or at their next post. And so there is that kind of, why are we letting people go off to interview and then say, oh yeah, I didn't think they would get that role because they went for a job at this school or that school, or oh yeah, why is that conversation happening anywhere? Why is anyone going off into an interview situation when the leader of their current school doesn't think that they have got everything they need in their toolkit to enable them to get that job? And I feel that's a real sense of responsibility around making sure that people are best equipped to go off and get that job.
Yeah, I'll just pick up briefly on, I think Karen and Andrew have answered it really well. For me, briefly, I think the question about if they don't fit the specification is a really important question, because the issue is, what is that specification? And is it the specification that they've always had? Should they revisit that to find what they really need, which is somebody who's not so well polished, and who's somebody who does think differently, somebody with different experiences, etc., etc., etc. So for me, perhaps a step back and think it's about what sort of person do we actually want to have a more diverse board. So having said that, there's a really interesting question we've got a guest from Atlanta. I've noticed in the US. So I know they've asked a question, which I'd quite like to pick up on that. It's come a long way. And it's about personal assumptions about race on boards, which we sort of mentioned before. How keen are people to pick up on that? And I know the board I'm on, Association of Chairs, we actually had a discussion around diversity more generally and about language quite recently. And I thought for some people it was quite uncomfortable. It was the first time they had had that conversation. There were, again, two Black and Asian people on the board, me and one Asian woman. And it was the first time actually I'd been on the board where that conversation had actually been had. So for me, it was quite an eye-opener that people actually are willing to have that conversation now, certainly on the boards that I've been on. Whether that's how widespread that is, I don't know, but I think the issue is now, how do we perpetuate that? How do we make sure that it carries on? And I'm slightly cynical about where we are now. And in 3 years' time, we're having the same discussions. Again, Karen says that action, not words. There's still not enough action for me. So yeah, I'm going to stop on that and hand over to one of my other fellow panelists.
I think there's also some quite sort of practical questions that people are asking about, like, where should you be advertising? And there were some good comments as well, people pointing out the fact that in the school sector, we're so kind of blind to the way that we do things. Our recruitment processes don't allow us to ask additional questions. We can't probe more deeply, even though we'd quite like to. And we advertise in, the Times educational supplement and ask around. So I think, Karen, you can probably talk to that a little bit in terms of how you've done things through LinkedIn and through other platforms to try to recruit.
Yeah, I was just thinking, I was going to say something and I thought I might lose my job, but I might say it anyway. If I ask an additional question, and if I start to probe, who's going to tell me off if I do that? Actually, aren't we supposed to be trying to get the best out of people? We're courting people. We're trying to probe in a way which is going to be constructive and be able to pull the best out of people. And so I just think that that's what I'm supposed to do. If I just ask everybody the same standard questions, it's like being in a classroom and just asking every single child the same question. Where's the differentiation in that? How is that equal opportunities? I'm not giving that person an opportunity in terms of voice and equal value. So yeah, I think you might have to have the courage to call it out from the beginning. In terms of your interview panel, just say, this is what we're going to do. We're not looking for fixed answers to fixed questions. We're trying to get underneath how valuable this person will be, and be able to put them in an atmosphere where they're going to give us their best. And they know that because I always think that being serving on a board is part of a reciprocal arrangement, which means that what people are giving their time, because if I tell you the amount of time that I take, giving to boards, and I still, I'm stimulated and I love it, but it's a lot of my time. So what am I going to get out of it? So I want, whenever we are offering anything, either it's a paid employment, or whether it is serving on a board, I want that person to be really clear about what they could gain as a consequence of participating. Does that answer your question, or does it kind of answer it, go off?
Yeah, it does. It does answer it.
And I think there's something there, Karen, as well, around if we're really excited about diversity in our institutions and we want everybody who comes to feel like, oh, this is going to be a great day, a great couple of days, hopefully, if I get through to day 2. But wouldn't it be great if people left the interview process feeling like it's been amazing CPD, I felt so valued, I found out so much about myself, I'm feeling super confident about going into the next interview because I've got some brilliant feedback. I mean, why do we still have recruitment processes that seem to be set up to say, here's the institution, go through those doors at your peril, you're going to sit here in silence and wait until somebody calls you into this room where you'll be met with some faces that have to look like this and will ask you only a specific set of questions and not deviate. Why do we want that? That is not the school system that I find exciting, that feels like it reflects any of our values. I think if we're really committed to this, we'll be so excited to break down the way in which we do recruitment for across the board. And there are ways of doing it that are so reciprocal, that are so generous, and that allow us to get the best from ourselves in terms of human beings, but also from other people. And I think sometimes, you know, people won't get the job immediately, okay, but what happens is people start saying, I went for a job there, I didn't get it, but it was an amazing experience. And that is the kind of talk we want to have about our schools and about our trusts, that word of mouth, it gets out there that this trust is really committed to diversity. And I know it just because when I went for an interview, just felt like I was in the right place. And if a job comes up there again, I'm going to apply for it.
I want to jump in on that to say that having, you know, I've straddled the kind of education sector and the sort of other business startup sector, and it's only the education sector that does it in this bonkers way. And most places want people to come away going, I didn't get the job, but by golly, am I going to try and apply again, because that's a fantastic place, I had a great time. I think we need to, that's why we need diverse boards and people from other sectors as well, is to challenge and hold us accountable for not just doing the kind of, this is the way we do it, this is the way we've always done it, we know it's broken, but we're going to do it because otherwise we might get in trouble. And there's been a few, I think this will be our last question, but there's been a few questions about how do you hold people accountable to really drive this agenda forward, to really try to disrupt this is the way we've always done it. And obviously there are kind of programs and things you can sign up to that do that, but how do you get people on side so that you don't just give this job to the only Black governor that you have and say, right, let's get diversity? How do you do that? Have we seen any good examples? Silence.
I think for me, accountability is about saying you're going to do something and then doing it and then monitoring whether it's working. So I think the public announcement that you're going to do it, a lot of people don't want to do that in case they think they fail. So it's saying publicly and then making sure that actually there's somebody within the organization who checks and monitors and reports back to things actually happening. For me, that's accountability. And it's not just one person, it's a whole organization.
That's useful. That's really useful. Thank you. Karen, did you want to come in on that?
Yeah, I was just thinking that it's an acknowledgement of our fallibility around this and saying, you know, actually, we haven't got this right. Wanting to just really talk about all the different ways in which we could have got this wrong. So, for example, I'll use the example of my school. So we think, yeah, you know, we've got our leadership team and, you know, we've got Black, Asian and, you know, French, etc., etc. It's all good. And middle leaders, yeah, and, you know, lots of females. And then I'm looking around the room in terms of senior leadership, middle leadership, and there's no testosterone. That's embarrassing. What am I doing about that? I'm calling it out. I'm saying to the whole school, my bad, we haven't got any males in our leadership team. This is what we're going to do about it. we're actually going to invite you all to a particular session. It's going to be led by, the CEO of a trust leader. It's going to talk about his journey in primary leadership. We're going to make sure that we're going to pair you up so that you can have some movement from where you are to where you need to be this year, next year, and so on. Yes, of course it's embarrassing, but I'm calling it out and doing something about it.
It's a case of you not only need to see it to be it, but you need to be it to see it as well. Because if you haven't noticed that, then you're not going to call it out, right? So we have to hold each other to account, address the elephants. So a final sort of wrap up thoughts from each of you, or things that you wanted to say but were never asked.
I guess I would like to say I'm kind of obsessive about this at the moment. That I feel like the most exciting places to work, the most innovative, luminary organisations are going to be places that really find this work exciting, and they want to be known as those organisations. And I think if you're surrounded, or you're working with people, or you're working in an institution and you feel like the board aren't getting it, or the governors aren't getting it, or the SLT aren't getting it, then there is something about the way that we talk about it with excitement, the way that we go to people who can change things and say, look, I want this organisation to be exciting, to be better, and here's how I think we can do it. And we take some best practice. We use, the McKinsey report is a great report to start with. It takes the business world and says this is how the best organizations are running themselves and making lots of money. And although it might feel distasteful to always be presenting the business case for diversity, actually for some people it's quite motivating. So we think use what's out there to convince people that this is exciting, luminary work.
Great. I'll just pick up on Andrew's best practice and a plug for the work that I'm doing. We're actually going to produce a guide next year called How to Recruit Black and Asian Trustees. And I've been approached by a funder foundation who's agreed to fund it. I can't say who it is at the moment, but the check is on its way soon, I hope. And it is about best practice. People don't know what's out there. They don't work together. So hopefully this guide would actually be a source, not just in the charity sector, but also in the education sector as well, about what is best practice, how do you reach networks that aren't your own, how do you set out inclusivity, and so on. So I'll leave that as a plug for the campaign.
Karen, do you want to come in on that?
How can I follow that? That's perfect. We're going to have a book. It's going to be funded by somebody else. Please, may I have a copy?
Fantastic. We also are starting up a BAME-Ed governance hub, and we're being supported by the National Governance Association to do that. So anyone who is interested in getting involved in that, please make yourselves known. You can pop us an email to bamed@outlook.com, and there's going to be follow-up email from this conversation with some resources and to further things to think about. I'm sure everyone's hungry and thirsty and dying to go off and do other things, but I wanted to just thank our incredible panelists for your time, for your effort, for your thought, and for the important work that you are doing in the sector to move all of this forward and more. And thank you to everybody who's joined us this evening. Our next Courageous Conversation will be in about a month's time, and we'll be looking at curriculum. So we thank you all for your time and for your effort. And we'll stick around a little bit longer, whoever wants to, just to pick up anything in the chat that you wanted addressing. But that's all from us now. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.